Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there is this comforting expectation of absolute precision. It feels like engineering. You fall down, your arm hurts, you go to the hospital, and the X-ray shows that jagged white line.
Right. It's completely binary.
Exactly. The doctor just points at the illuminated film and says, there it is. That's the problem. It is either fractured or it is intact.
Yeah, there is absolutely no philosophical debate about the bone.
It's clean.
Yeah.
And as human beings, I mean, we crave that. We desperately want things to be visible, to be easily categorized, and to follow a predictable set of rules that we can just, memorize and apply over and over again. We want the universe to be a multiple choice test where the answers are already known.
But the reality is, the moment you step out of the physical sciences and into the realm of human progress, into the realm of actually creating the future, that clean, predictable X-ray machine just shatters.
Oh, Tyler.
The rules completely dissolve.
And that feeling of stepping out of the predictable paint-by-numbers world and into an entirely blank canvas, that profound, almost terrifying sense of uncharted territory, is exactly what we are exploring today. Welcome to the Book Nook.
We are incredibly glad you are here with us.
We are completely dedicated to exploring the most impactful, transformative books in personal growth, psychology, and self-help. We take the ideas that shape our world, the concepts that truly shift paradigms, and we figure out how they tick together.
Yeah, the goal is to help you unearth those pivotal structural insights that do not just give you a temporary burst of motivation, but actually change the fundamental operating system of how you view your daily life and your long-term goals.
So to you, the listener, sitting in traffic right now or folding laundry or maybe taking a walk, welcome to the conversation. We are setting the stage today for a deep dive that I honestly believe could violently disrupt how you look at your career, your ambitions, and the nature of the future itself.
It really is that big.
Because today we are immersing ourselves in the ideas of a fascinating, often controversial, and undeniably brilliant text.
Oh.
We're talking about 0 to 1, Notes on Startups, or How to Build the Future by Peter Thiel with Blake Masters.
It is a phenomenal, dense piece of philosophy masquerading as a business book. And to truly grasp the scale of what we were talking about, we have to start by decoding the core concept that sits right there on the cover. Like, what does it actually mean, mechanically and historically, to go from 0 to 1?
I think the best way to visualize this is to realize that humanity makes progress in two entirely different directions. They are so different that they barely belong in the same category.
Yeah.
The first kind of progress is horizontal progress. This is going from 1 to n. Think of n as just, any number. This kind of progress is simply taking something that already exists, something that we know works, and copying it.
It is the math of multiplication. If you have one functional typewriter and you build an assembly line to stamp out 100 identical typewriters, you have made horizontal progress. You have scaled a known solution.
And if you zoom out and look at the entire planet, horizontal progress has a specific name. It's globalization.
Exactly.
It is the act of taking an idea that works in London or New York and making it work in Mumbai or Lagos.
Yes, and we prioritize horizontal progress because it is incredibly easy to visualize. I mean, we already know what the end state looks like. China's staggering modernization over the last 4 decades is the ultimate historical example of 1 to n progress.
Right. They looked at the developed world and brilliantly, systematically copied railroads, air conditioning, modern supply chains, and skyscraper construction. They didn't invent those things from scratch. They just deployed them at massive scale.
But then you have the second kind of progress. This is the vertical axis, going from 0 to 1. This means doing something completely fundamentally new.
Yeah.
If you have a typewriter on your desk and you decide you want to write faster, 1 to n progress says build more typewriters. But 0 to 1 progress is inventing the digital word processor.
Oh, that's such a good way to put it.
You have not just copied a design, you have birthed an entirely new category into existence. And the single defining word for this vertical progress is technology. It is the act of creation.
Which brings us to the underlying mission of our deep dives today. Our goal is to dissect this idea to help you unlearn the generic, exhausting, hyper-competitive rules of modern society.
The rules that tell you to just copy everyone else.
Exactly. To fight for the same scraps, to be slightly better than the person sitting next to you. We want to figure out how you can build a truly unique and immensely valuable future by discovering what the book calls secrets, the hidden truths of the universe that absolutely no one else is currently looking for.
Before we can even begin to design that kind of future, though, we have to aggressively audit how we view the present. We have to shatter a lot of comfortable illusions.
Yeah, we do.
And surprisingly, the best tool for shattering those illusions is a single, highly uncomfortable job interview question.
Oh, this question is brutal. It is the author's absolute favorite thing to ask a candidate when he is hiring, and it strips away all the corporate polish instantly.
It really does.
The question goes like this. What important truth do very few people agree with you on?
It sounds deceptively simple, right? On the surface, it feels like a standard HR icebreaker right up there with, what is your greatest weakness?
Like, I'm a perfectionist.
Exactly. But if you sit down and actually try to formulate an honest answer, it induces a kind of intellectual paralysis.
I can personally attest to that. I was racking my brain trying to come up with a good answer before we started recording, and everything I thought of felt completely hollow. Why is this specific arrangement of words so uniquely paralyzing?
Because it attacks us on two highly vulnerable fronts simultaneously. First, it is intellectually demanding because of how we are socially conditioned.
Okay, how so?
Think about the structure of the traditional education system. From kindergarten onward, school trains us that all valid knowledge is agreed upon. We are tested on consensus. If everyone agrees on a historical date or a mathematical formula, it is elevated to the status of a fact. If people disagree on it, it is relegated to a subjective opinion. So to even locate a truth that defies the consensus requires a rare level of independent, unconditioned thinking.
Right, our brains are literally wired to view consensus as a proxy for reality. If a million people believe it, our monkey brains assume it must be true to keep us safe from the predator in the bushes.
Exactly. But the second front is even harder. It is psychologically punishing. To successfully answer this question, you have to look another human being directly in the eye. Usually someone in a position of power who holds your future job in their hands and confidently states something you know they likely find weird, uncomfortable, or deeply unpopular.
Which goes against all our instincts.
It requires a specific flavor of social courage that is arguably much rarer than raw intelligence.
And from what the author says, most people completely faceplant when they try to answer it. They offer up these terrible safe answers. They'll confidently say something like, our education system is fundamentally broken. Or they will say, America is truly exceptional.
Yes. Or you get the edgy philosophical answers like there is no God or capitalism is inherently flawed.
I am going to push back here, though. Why are those considered failure states for the question? The education system is broken. Feels like a very true statement.
Right.
It's an important truth.
It might be true, but it fails the test because it is not a secret. It fails the second half of the question that very few people agree with you on. Education is broken is basically the default conventional wisdom of modern society. Every politician, parent, and teacher agrees with it in some capacity. A truly spectacular answer to this question must structurally take the form of, most people firmly believe X, but the truth is actually the exact opposite of X. You have to find a blind spot in the cultural consensus.
This search for blind spots brings us to a really fascinating and frankly bizarre trichotomy proposed in the text. I was completely thrown by this when I first read it.
It's definitely out there.
The author brings up the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, the notorious domestic terrorist, and directly compares him to a modern hipster barista in Brooklyn. Okay, I have to play the skeptic here. How on earth do a homicidal recluse and a 20-something pouring oat milk latte art relate to each other in any meaningful way? That feels like an incredibly provocative stretch just to get a reaction.
It is intensely provocative, but the underlying logic connecting them is brilliant. It centers entirely on how human beings categorize the goals they pursue in life. Kaczynski, in his manifesto, argued that human goals naturally divide into three distinct buckets: the easy, the hard, and the impossible.
Okay, easy, hard, impossible. That makes sense.
He theorized that in the modern industrialized world, all the hard problems, the deeply satisfying problems that require extreme human effort but are actually solvable, have already been solved by science and technology.
Like what?
Well, we already cured the major diseases, we mapped the continents, we split the atom. Therefore, modern humanity is left with only two kinds of tasks. We have the easy problems, which are so trivial a child could do them, or we have the impossible problems, which are completely beyond human capacity, like stopping the aging process or controlling the weather.
So it is essentially a profound, paralyzing sense of depression about the state of the world, a belief that the frontier is permanently closed.
Precisely. And this is where the terrorist and the hipster converge. They both represent a total systemic loss of faith in the technological frontier.
Wow.
Kaczynski's response, which manifested as horrific, inexcusable violence, was to try and physically destroy the technological infrastructure of society. He wanted to bomb us back to the Stone Age so that humanity could reset, creating a world where hard, satisfying survival problems existed again.
That is just wow. In the hipster.
The hipster's response is psychological withdrawal. Instead of violence, they retreat into an aesthetic of faux nostalgia. They shoot on vintage 35mm film, they listen exclusively to vinyl records, they adopt 19th century handlebar mustaches.
Right, the whole Brooklyn lumberjack look.
Exactly. It is a subconscious retreat to a historical era when people were still genuinely optimistic about the future. The hipster's internal logic is, if everything meaningful and hard has already been accomplished by previous generations, why bother trying to achieve anything new? Why not just feign an ironic allergy to ambition and become a barista who cures their own artisanal meats?
That is incredibly perceptive. They both suffer from the exact same disease. They fundamentally disbelieve in the existence of secrets. They do not believe there are any undiscovered truths about nature or physics or human behavior left to uncover.
Yeah.
It is as if they believe we have mapped every square inch of the globe, filled in all the blank spaces, and now there are no new continents left to explore. We are just stuck doing laps in the same swimming pool.
And this societal loss of belief in secrets does not just affect terrorists and hipsters. It directly and visibly dictates how the average person views their entire life trajectory. It forces us to ask a deeply uncomfortable question. Are we treating our lives as nothing more than lottery tickets?
Right. This totally shifts the lens on how we view the future. Are we the authors of our destiny, or is it all just a random roll of the dice?
Exactly.
The text breaks this down into an incredibly useful framework: definite versus indefinite futures. If you possess a definite view of the future, you believe the future is something that can be explicitly planned, engineered, and designed through focused human agency.
But if you hold an indefinite view, you think the future is inherently random, hazy, chaotic, and driven entirely by chance and complex forces completely outside of your control.
To ground this in reality, let's look at recent history. America, especially in the post-war era, used to be defined by a cultural state of definite optimism.
Very much so.
In the 1950s and 60s, we didn't just hope the future would be good, we actively physically built it. We engineered the interstate highway system, connecting a massive continent. We designed the Apollo space program from scratch and put humans on the moon. People made incredibly bold, concrete, decades-long plans, and then they executed them.
But look at the cultural shift today. We have largely transitioned into a state of indefinite optimism. We still have this vague, lingering hope that the future will somehow be better, that the economy will grow, that things will improve, but we have absolutely no idea how it will happen.
We're just crossing our fingers.
Right, we don't have a specific plan. So instead of building entirely new industries or infrastructure, our brightest minds just rearrange the old things.
Financial engineering is the perfect example of this.
Exactly. Wall Street bankers make billions of dollars not by creating new physical value, but by rearranging the capital structures of existing, decades-old companies. Management consultants get paid millions to fly in and squeeze a few extra drops of efficiency out of outdated supply chains. They are optimizing the past, not inventing the future.
And it is terrifying because this mentality infects us when we are teenagers. Look at the modern high school and university system. High-achieving students are systematically trained from the age of 14 to be indefinite optimists.
Oh, the resume padding.
Yes. What do? They frantically pad their resumes with dozens of unrelated extracurricular activities. They join the debate team, the track team, the French club, and volunteer at the animal shelter. They try to excel at absolutely everything, just a tiny little bit.
And why do they do that? To maintain what society calls optionality. They are terrified of committing to a single, definite path, like deciding at 18 that they want to be a marine biologist and focusing their entire being on that. Instead, they want to keep all their options open. They treat their own human potential like a diversified financial portfolio of lottery tickets, hoping one of them randomly pays out.
I'll just go to law school to keep my options open. It is a phrase you hear on every college campus, and it is painfully tragic when you view it through this lens.
It really is.
Because if you truly reject that mentality, if you believe in a definite future, and you manage to do the incredibly hard work of finding a rare secret worth pursuing, you have to actually commit. You have to burn the boats.
Yeah.
You have to build a vehicle specifically designed to capture the value of your secret. And doing that requires breaking what might be the single biggest taboo in all of modern business. You must build a monopoly.
That is the ultimate unavoidable transition, moving from the theoretical discovery of the secret to the brutal reality of capturing its economic value.
Let's really dig into this idea because it sounds almost illegal when you first hear it. In traditional economics 101, the first thing they write on the whiteboard is that perfect competition is the absolute ideal utopian state of a market. What does that actually mean in plain English?
In the theoretical mathematical model of perfect competition, you have a market where all the competing firms are completely, fundamentally undifferentiated. They sell the exact same homogeneous products.
Okay.
Think of a market for wheat or generic copper wire. Because everyone's product is identical, no single producer has any pricing power. They are entirely at the mercy of the market.
So if I try to charge 10 cents more for my wheat, my customers instantly abandon me and buy from the farmer next door.
Correct. And here is the brutal mechanical reality of perfect competition. If there is even a tiny sliver of profit to be made in that market, new competitors immediately rush in, increase the total supply of the product, and drive market prices down. They will keep entering the market until all the profit is ruthlessly competed away to exactly zero. In the long run, under perfect competition, no company makes any meaningful economic profit. They just barely survive.
This completely blew my mind. We are always taught that capitalism and competition are basically synonyms, but they are actually polar opposites. Capitalism is defined by the accumulation and growth of capital. Perfect competition is a mathematical state that systematically destroys all capital and profit.
They are mutually exclusive. The true opposite of perfect competition is monopoly. A monopoly is a company that is so exceptionally good at what it does that no other firm in the world can offer a close substitute.
Right.
Because it owns its market, it is not at the mercy of arbitrary market forces. It can dictate its own prices. It produces at the exact quantity and price point that maximizes its own profit, allowing it to accumulate massive capital, which it can then reinvest into long-term innovation.
But the way companies talk about this in the real world is hilarious because absolutely everyone is lying through their teeth. The text identifies two very distinct types of deception: the monopolist's lies and the competitor's lies. Let's expose the monopolist's lie first. You have these massive tech behemoths, and they go out of their way to pretend they're in these desperate, bloody, competitive dogfights, right?
They absolutely have to lie. Monopolists lie defensively to protect themselves from government scrutiny, congressional hearings, and antitrust lawsuits.
Yeah, you don't want Congress looking at you.
If you are a monopoly, the last thing you want is a target on your back. So they define their market as broadly and absurdly as possible.
Right, Google is a classic example here. Since the early 2000s, Google hasn't really competed in search. They just absolutely dominated. But they never say that.
No, Google's PR team never says, "We're an unstoppable search engine monopoly." Instead, they frame themselves as a tiny, vulnerable fish in a massive, terrifying ocean.
Oh, yeah.
They say, "We are actually a small player in the global advertising market, furiously competing against Facebook and television networks and physical billboards." Or they will pivot and say, "We are merely one participant in the broader consumer technology space, fighting for survival against Apple wearables and autonomous vehicles."
So sneaky.
By framing their market as the union of several gigantic, trillions of dollars industries, their actual monopoly looks mathematically small and constantly threatened.
It is brilliant misdirection. And then on the flip side, you have the competitor's lie. These are the people who are hopelessly trapped in the meat grinder of brutal, perfect competition. But their egos can't handle it, so they do the exact opposite. They pretend they are entirely unique and unassailable by defining their market as the intersection of incredibly specific, infinitesimally small things.
Oh, the restaurant example.
Yes, the classic example is a restaurant owner. A guy opens a restaurant in Mountain View and proudly declares, "We are the absolute only British food restaurant in Palo Alto."
Which might be entirely factually true, but it completely misses the point of business. Just because you have situated yourself at a unique, uncontested intersection does not magically mean anyone actually wants to buy what you are selling.
I love the movie script analogy used to illustrate this delusion. Imagine a frantic screenwriter running into a Hollywood executive's office to pitch a movie. He says, "Okay, hear me out. I have a guaranteed blockbuster. It stars the rapper Jay-Z, and the plot is a cross between the 90s cyber thriller Hackers and the movie Jaws."
Oh, no.
It's about a rap star who joins an elite group of teenage computer hackers to hunt down a great white shark that killed his friend.
It is genuinely hilarious because it highlights the absurdity perfectly.
Right. The screenwriter says, it's never been done before, we have zero competition, and the executive just stares at him and thinks, sure, it's a completely unique intersection of genres, but maybe there is a very good reason it's never been done before. It is a fundamentally terrible idea.
It illustrates how desperate people become to invent artificial differentiation where none actually exists. They want to feel special without doing the hard work of creating a 10x better product,
Lie.
which leads us to a really profound philosophical inquiry.
Okay.
If competition is so demonstrably destructive to profits and mental health, why do we engage in it so brutally? Why are we drawn to conflict? And to explain this, the book contrasts the worldviews of two radically different thinkers, Karl Marx and William Shakespeare.
Now this is a pivot. Karl Marx and the Bard. Let's see how they view the root causes of human conflict, because they are complete opposites.
Well, let's look at Karl Marx first. Marx believed that human beings fight because they are fundamentally irreconcilably different.
Yeah.
In his worldview, the proletariat fights the bourgeoisie because their material circumstances, their daily realities, and their economic goals are completely opposed. To Marx, the greater the difference between two groups, the greater and more inevitable the conflict.
So differences create war. But Shakespeare saw human nature from the exact opposite angle.
Right. To Shakespeare, all combatants ultimately look more or less identical. They do not fight because they are different. They fight because they are exactly the same.
Like Romeo and Juliet.
Think of the famous opening prologue of Romeo and Juliet. Two households, both alike in dignity. The Montagues and the Capulets are not radically different species. They're basically the exact same noble family occupying the same city.
Yeah.
They are obsessed with each other, they constantly copy each other's insults and fashions, and as their bloody feud escalates, they completely lose sight of why they even started fighting in the first place. The conflict becomes self-sustaining simply because they mirror each other.
And the terrifying realization is that modern society, and specifically modern business, absolutely follows the Shakespearean model, not the Marxist one. Our entire education system is essentially a factory designed to produce Shakespearean combatants.
Now,
Think about it. We sit in the exact same rows of desks, we are forced to study the exact same standardized textbooks, and we are trained to fight tooth and nail against our peers for the exact same generic, scarce prizes getting an A on the chemistry test, or fighting for one of the limited spots at an Ivy League university. We fight so fiercely precisely because our goals have been made identical.
And that deeply ingrained psychological programming bleeds directly into the corporate world. When highly educated students graduate, they don't stop fighting, they just change the venue. It leads to incredibly costly, irrational wars over utterly trivial differences.
The story of the Oracle versus Informix billboard war from the late 90s is the ultimate manifestation of this. You had Larry Ellison, the legendary founder of the software giant Oracle, and his former protege who had left to become the CEO of a rival database company called Informix. Their office buildings were located right near each other in Silicon Valley.
It's so petty.
Instead of focusing on building dramatically better software for their customers, they literally just started buying highway billboards on US Route 101 solely to insult each other's egos.
It devolved into a playground shouting match funded by corporate treasuries.
Exactly.
Huh?
Informix bought a billboard near Oracle's headquarters that said Dinosaur Crossing, implying Oracle was an outdated fossil. So how does Oracle respond? They buy a billboard directly next to it that says Caution, Snails, implying Informix was incredibly slow.
Wow.
They were so blinded by their obsession with utterly destroying their mirror image rival that they collectively lost their minds. And the punchline is incredibly dark. While the CEO of Informix was busy obsessing over billboard graphic design, his actual company imploded from a massive accounting scandal, and he ended up going to federal prison.
It is a literal Shakespearean tragedy playing out in the tech sector. Or look at a more recent example. The sudden proliferation of those little square credit card readers that you plug into the headphone jack of a smartphone.
I remember those.
A company called Square invented the technology. It was a neat innovation. But almost instantly, suddenly, every single tech and finance company, Intuit, PayPal, everyone copied the exact same physical design. Within a year, there were a dozen identical square pieces of plastic flooding the market.
Just totally identical.
They were engaged in a bloody, margin-crushing war over a completely undifferentiated commodity. In those scenarios, everyone loses sight of creating actual new value for the consumer because they are entirely blinded by the rivalry itself.
Okay, I want to pause here and synthesize this. If everything we've discussed is true, if monopolies are the ultimate economic goal for a creator, and if competition is this destructive Shakespearean trap that destroys profits and sanity, why does modern startup culture preach the exact opposite gospel?
That's the big question.
If you read any business blog today, you are constantly bombarded with advice telling you to stay lean, remain flexible, above all else be a disruptor. Where does this culture come from if it's so wrong?
To understand the origin of that flawed modern culture, we have to look back at a massive collective trauma that fundamentally broke the psychology of Silicon Valley. We have to analyze the dot-com crash of the year 2000.
The late 90s. The great digital gold rush. We need to paint the picture of what this actually looked like for people who weren't there, because late 1999 was a period of absolute hallucinatory madness.
Madness is the right word.
You had startup companies with literally zero revenue throwing incredibly lavish million-dollar launch parties. Founders were racking up $1,000 dinner bills at fancy restaurants, and when the check came, they would try to pay the waiter with unpriced shares of their startup's stock.
And the most insane part is that sometimes the restaurant owners actually accepted the stock. The euphoria was completely untethered from reality. You had people launching initial public offerings from their living rooms before they had even legally incorporated a business or hired an engineer. You had an environment where the most celebrated, successful companies were those operating on a business model where they deliberately lost money on every single transaction, arguing they would make it up in pure volume.
Which makes zero.
It was irrational exuberance on steroids. The book mentions a jaw-dropping anecdote where a South Korean firm literally wired PayPal $5 million without negotiating a single deal point, without asking for a board seat, and without signing a single legal document. They just wanted in.
It sounds like a collective fever dream. But of course, gravity always wins. In March of 2000, the music abruptly stopped. The bubble burst violently. Trillions of dollars of wealth vanished overnight, and the companies that managed to survive the wreckage looked around at the carnage and drew 4 specific dogmatic lessons. The problem is, these lessons were born of trauma, not logic, and they still infect business culture today. Let's analyze those 4 false lessons.
First, looking at the wreckage of companies that promised to change the world and failed, the survivors concluded that grand visions are inherently dangerous. Therefore, the first rule became, make only incremental advances. Never promise the moon. Just take small, safe, easily defensible steps.
And the second trauma response was about planning, right? The companies that spent millions executing rigid 5-year plans were destroyed. So the new rule became, stay lean and flexible.
Exactly.
Planning is seen as arrogant and inflexible. The modern advice is to just try things out randomly, build a minimum viable product, throw it at the wall, iterate based on user feedback, and treat the entire business like a constantly shifting random experiment.
Third, looking at the companies that tried to create entirely new markets and burned through their cash, the consensus became, improve on the competition. Do not arrogantly try to create a new market prematurely. Instead, find a market that already exists, where the customers are already validated, and just try to build a product that is perhaps 10% better or slightly cheaper than the reigning champion.
And the fourth false lesson, which might be the most pervasive, is focus entirely on the product, not on sales. The thinking was that the 90s were ruined by slick marketers selling vaporware. Therefore, advertising and salespeople are inherently sleazy. The new gospel was that if your technology is truly good, it will magically sell itself through viral growth. If you have to sell it, the product must be defective.
Those 4 reactionary lessons became the absolute, unquestioned gospel of the modern tech and business world. But the author argues incredibly persuasively that if you actually want to go from 0 to 1, the exact opposite principles are correct.
I remember reading this section and being stunned by how aggressively he flips them. Instead of safely making incremental advances, he argues that boldness is always better than triviality.
Yes.
Instead of staying lean and treating your business like a random walk, a bad plan is strictly better than having no plan at all. Instead of safely improving on existing competition, you must realize that competitive markets relentlessly destroy your profits. And finally, completely destroying the engineer's fantasy, sales matters just as much as the product itself.
If you can deprogram yourself from the trauma of the 90s and embrace those four true lessons, you can actually begin to lay down the architecture of a real monopoly. And the text breaks this architecture down into four essential structural pillars. If you want to survive and capture value, you need to possess at least a few of these overwhelming advantages.
Let's examine these four pillars. Pillar number one is proprietary technology.
Yes, and the mathematical rule of thumb here is absolutely crucial. To qualify as a true monopoly advantage, your proprietary technology must be at least 10 times better than its closest substitute. 10 times. Not just like twice as good.
No, 10 times. If it is only 20% better, the market will just view it as a marginal, negligible improvement. Human beings are lazy. They will not endure the friction of switching to a new product unless the new product is a completely transformative 10x leap forward.
Amazon, in its infancy, is the perfect illustration of this. They didn't launch by building a physical bookstore that was just a little bit nicer or had slightly better coffee than the local Borders.
Right.
They used the internet to create a bookstore that had 10 times or maybe even 100 times more book inventory than any physical retail space could ever possibly hold. Or think about the iPad. Microsoft spent an entire decade trying to manufacture early tablet computers, but they were clunky, relied on a stylus, and were awful to use. Apple came along and made a capacitive touch design improvement that was 10x more responsive, taking the tablet from an unusable gimmick to an essential daily tool. Pillar number two is network effects. This is a phenomenon where a product becomes inherently more useful and valuable as more people adopt it. Telephones are the classic example. One telephone is useless, two is a novelty, a billion is a necessity. But there is a massive counterintuitive paradox when trying to build a network effect business. To eventually achieve a global network, you must start by targeting a tiny, almost microscopic market.
I want to push back on that because it sounds wrong. If I'm pitching a venture capitalist, they want to see a massive total addressable market from day one. They want a billion potential customers. Why would I intentionally start tiny?
Because of the physics of adoption.
Yeah.
If you drop a new social network into a market of 1 billion people, the users will be so thinly spread out that they will never find each other and the network effect will never ignite. You have to create overwhelming density first.
Oh, I see.
Mark Zuckerberg intuitively understood this. He did not launch Facebook for the entire global internet. He launched it exclusively for the students of Harvard University. It was a laughably tiny market of maybe 10,000 people. But by restricting it, he achieved total monopolistic dominance and complete density over that specific campus almost overnight. Everyone was on it. Only after he monopolized that tiny market did he expand to the Ivy League, then all colleges, and finally, the world.
That makes perfect sense. Density over scale initially.
Okay.
Pillar three is economies of scale. This means a monopoly inherently gets stronger and more profitable as it gets bigger. And software is the ultimate, historically unprecedented example of this.
Exactly. To understand why software is so lucrative, you have to look at marginal costs. Let's compare a software company to a traditional service business, like a local yoga studio.
Okay, yoga studio.
If you own a yoga studio, your ability to scale is severely capped by physical reality. You only have so much square footage, you can only physically fit 20 yoga mats in the room, and you have to pay the instructor for that specific hour. To double your revenue, you have to rent a second building, hire more staff, and double your fixed costs. Your margins never really improve.
But software breaks physics.
It does. Once the initial code for an app or a program is written, even if it costs $10 million to develop, the marginal cost of producing the second copy or the billionth copy is virtually zero. You just duplicate the data. A software company can scale from 10 users to 10 million users with almost zero additional fixed costs, which means the profit margins expand exponentially as the company grows.
And the final pillar, number four, is branding. Apple is undeniably the king of this pillar. The severe minimalist design of their products, the glass and steel architecture of their retail stores, the cult-like anticipation of their keynote speeches. They own the concept of premium technology in the consumer's mind. But there's a vital warning here. Branding is incredibly dangerous if you do not have the underlying substance to support it.
Right. You cannot just slap a sleek logo on a mediocre, undifferentiated product, hire a celebrity spokesperson, and expect to conjure a monopoly out of thin air. Apple's brand only works because it is structurally backed by a 10x proprietary technology ecosystem involving custom silicon chips and a tightly controlled operating system.
So you have these four distinct pillars. But to successfully execute them, you have to avoid a massive cultural trap that ensnares so many ambitious people. Disruption. I have to admit, I've always thought disruption was the coolest word in business.
Everyone does.
Everyone wants to be a disruptor. It sounds rebellious and innovative. Why does the book argue that framing yourself as a disruptor is actually a fatal mistake?
Because words dictate our psychology. Disruption is a trap because it forces you to look at yourself entirely through the eyes of the older, incumbent firm you are trying to unseat.
Right.
If you boldly declare, I'm going to disrupt the recording industry, you are entirely defining your corporate identity by your relationship to your enemy. You are picking a massive, highly visible fight.
Which is exactly what Napster did in the late 90s.
Precisely. The name Napster practically implies trouble and annoyance. They brazenly picked a fight with the entire consolidated music industry. And what happened? Instead of focusing on building long-term value, they got entirely bogged down in negative-sum legal warfare, defending themselves against endless copyright lawsuits, and they were ultimately crushed by the incumbents.
Yeah.
You should never wake up and decide you want to be a disruptor. Your goal should be to avoid competition entirely.
It's the Sun Tzu approach. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. So if you don't want to be a disruptor, and you know the first mover advantage is often just a myth because the first mover usually makes all the fatal mistakes, what is the actual goal?
You want to be the last mover. First mover advantage is merely a short-term tactical maneuver. It is not a goal in itself. You want to be the absolute last company to enter a specific market, make the definitive 10x technological leap that solves the problem permanently, and then enjoy decades of unchallenged monopoly profits.
That makes a lot of sense.
You start small, quietly monopolize a highly specific niche like Amazon did with obscure books, or PayPal did with eBay power sellers, and then gradually, almost invisibly, expand your dominance into adjacent markets before the incumbents even realize what is happening.
That concept of expanding from a tiny niche into total dominance perfectly transitions us into the math of how you actually select that niche. Because to become a last mover, you really need to understand the underlying, almost invisible mathematics of the universe.
Oh, absolutely.
The math that dictates not just venture capital returns, but surprisingly, the trajectory of your own life. We are talking about the power law.
The power law. It is essentially the famous 80-20 rule, the Pareto principle, but injected with steroids. To grasp the power law, you have to go back to the concept of compound interest and exponential growth, which Albert Einstein allegedly called the greatest mathematical discovery of all time, the eighth wonder of the world.
Let's break down why this is so unintuitive for our brains.
Yeah.
Human beings are naturally wired to expect a normal distribution. We expect a bell curve. If you map the heights of 1,000 random men, most will cluster around 5'9", with a few very short guys and a few very tall guys. Things taper off symmetrically. But the universe doesn't always distribute things evenly. In complex systems, it distributes them exponentially.
Exactly. Wealth, city populations, and earthquakes do not follow a bell curve. They follow a power law.
Yeah.
The single biggest earthquake in a given year is magnitudes more destructive than all the smaller earthquakes combined. The population of the biggest city in a country often dwarfs the populations of the next dozen towns.
And in business, the single biggest monopoly captures vastly more economic value than millions of generic, undifferentiated competitors put together.
Right.
But venture capitalists, the very people whose entire professional existence relies on funding these startups, constantly fail to internalize this math. They engage in a strategy that is mocked as spray and pray.
Because even highly educated investors desperately cling to the comfort of the normal distribution. A typical venture capitalist looks at their fund and thinks, okay, if I spread my money across 10 different companies, I can hedge my risk. 3 of them will completely fail, 4 will do okay and maybe return my money, and hopefully 3 will be solid hits that double my investment.
They try to diversify.
They try to build highly diversified portfolios. But venture capital returns fundamentally rebel against the bell curve.
So what does a power law return actually look like in a venture portfolio? How extreme is it?
It is shockingly extreme. In a true power law distribution, the single most successful investment in a venture fund will equal or vastly outperform the financial returns of the entire rest of the fund combined.
That is mind-boggling. So company number 1 makes more money than companies 2 through 10 added together.
Correct. And it completely rewrites the strategic math of investing. It creates what Thiel calls the ultimate rule of venture capital. As an investor, you should only ever write a check to a company if that specific company possesses the potential to return the value of your entire fund by itself.
Because if a startup doesn't have that hyperscale $10 billion potential, even if it's a nice profitable little business, it is mathematically useless to the fund's overall survival. The math demands absolute monsters.
Yes.
There's a staggering real-world example of this involving the legendary firm Andreessen Horowitz. In 2010, they invested $250,000 into a tiny, quirky photo-sharing app with a dozen employees. That app was Instagram. 2 years later, Mark Zuckerberg swoops in and Facebook buys Instagram for $1 billion. Andreessen Horowitz nets $78 million from their initial check.
The $250,000 investment turning into $78 million. That is a 312x return. In any normal industry, that is an unbelievable career-defining home run.
But here is the brutal reality of the power law. Because Andreessen Horowitz's overall fund size at the time was $1.5 billion, even that massive, seemingly impossible 312x return wasn't enough to cover the whole fund.
Wow.
It barely moved the needle relative to their total capital. It just proves how terrifyingly extreme the power law really is. You don't just need hits, you need generation-defining monopolies.
And while that is fascinating for billionaires managing funds, the true value of understanding the power law is applying it to our listeners' daily lives, because this principle dictates everything.
Yes. I want to challenge the traditional advice we were all given growing up. The ultimate golden rule from our parents and guidance counselors is always, don't put all your eggs in one basket, diversify your skills, spread your bets, hedge your risks.
And if you are playing a game of pure chance, like a state lottery or spinning a roulette wheel, that advice is mathematically sound. In a purely random system, buying many different tickets increases your probability of hitting the jackpot.
But the power law emphatically tells us that a human life is not a lottery. We possess agency. If you attempt to diversify your career by keeping dozens of equal, low-commitment options open, say you major in general communications, you learn a tiny bit of coding, you dabble in graphic design, you do a little bit of everything, but never commit to one intense, agonizing pursuit, you are systematically guaranteeing your own mediocrity. You are hedging yourself into irrelevance.
This raises an incredibly important introspective question for everyone listening right now. How are you allocating the finite capital of your own time? You are, right now, an active investor. Every single day you wake up and go to work, you are investing a day of your life's energy.
That's a great way to think about it.
But unlike a venture capitalist, you cannot diversify your portfolio. You cannot simultaneously run 12 different careers and hope one of them hits a billion-dollar valuation. You only have one life. Therefore, you have to do the agonizing work of figuring out the one most valuable thing you can do, and you must commit to it entirely.
That is a terrifying but profound paradigm shift. It means that owning 0.01% of the equity in the next Google, or dedicating your life to being the absolute best in the world at one highly specific skill, is worth vastly more than owning 100% of a failing, undifferentiated, jack-of-all-trades solo business.
Absolutely. But let's say a listener takes this to heart. You find a secret. You accept the power law, you commit your life, and you decide you want to build a company to capture that value. That decision brings us to the mechanics of creation. Because building a new company is functionally identical to constructing a massive skyscraper.
If the concrete foundation is poured in correctly, if there are structural cracks on day one, you absolutely cannot fix it once the building is 100 stories high in the air. The whole thing will collapse.
Exactly.
This principle is so immutable, it is literally codified in the book as Thiel's law. A startup that is messed up at its foundation cannot be fixed later. The damage is permanent.
And the most critical load-bearing element of that foundation isn't the code or the product. It is the people, the founders. Choosing a co-founder for a venture is not like hiring a contractor. It is exactly like entering into a marriage. If you pair up with someone you just met 5 minutes ago at a networking event because they have a cool resume, you have no shared history, no trust, and no prudent mechanism for resolving conflict. It is a massive existential risk. You require deep, pre-existing alignment.
To understand how companies tear themselves apart, we have to look at the 3 specific forces that govern corporate alignment. Misalignment in any of these 3 vectors is fatal. The vectors are ownership, possession, and control.
Let's break them down.
Okay. Ownership refers to who physically holds the equity, the shares. Usually this is the founders, the early employees, and the venture capitalists. Possession refers to the people who actually run the daily, boots-on-the-ground operations, the CEO, the managers, the engineers. And control refers to the people who sit in the boardroom and govern the macro direction of the entity, the board of directors.
When those 3 specific groups fall out of alignment, the company suffers a fatal heart attack.
It's over.
For example, if the board of directors, representing the investors, demands immediate, safe profitability to show a return, But the CEO and the engineers want to aggressively burn cash to fund long-term experimental growth, you have an immediate, bloody civil war. The foundation cracks.
Which perfectly sets up what I think is the most counterintuitive, jarring secret revealed in the entire book. We always assume that higher pay attracts better talent and better results. But what is the single most accurate, measurable indicator that an early-stage startup will actually be successful?
A highly restricted, remarkably low CEO salary.
Okay, I have to stop you right there. A low CEO salary. In what universe does that make sense?
I know, it sounds crazy.
If I'm a venture capitalist and the CEO of the company I just gave $5 million to is stressing out about making their mortgage payment or paying their kids' tuition, they are absolutely going to be distracted. They're going to make panicked short-term decisions just to keep their own lights on. Wouldn't you want to pay them a massive salary to completely take personal financial stress off the table so they can focus on the vision?
That is the standard logical corporate thinking, yes. But in a high-growth startup, the psychological dynamics are entirely inverted. If you pay a startup CEO a massive market rate salary, say $500,000 a year, what are you actually incentivizing them to do?
No, not to mess up.
You are incentivizing them to protect their lucrative position. They morph from a visionary founder into a risk-averse political bureaucrat. Their primary goal becomes not getting fired.
Oh.
But if their cash salary is painfully low, the only possible mathematical way they can achieve wealth is if the value of the company's equity absolutely explodes over a decade. It forces perfect, unshakable alignment between the CEO and the investors.
It essentially forces the CEO to burn the boats.
Yeah.
They have no safety net, so they have to conquer the island. And that extreme alignment has to cascade down to the culture of the entire team. Which brings us to the difference between a ping-pong table culture and a true cult.
When people in the media talk about startup culture today, they usually point to superficial perks. They talk about nap pods, free kombucha on tap, unlimited vacation days, and generic corporate mission statements about hiring smart people to do good work.
Right.
But the author argues that true, durable company culture has absolutely nothing to do with perks. True culture is about a group of people being fanatically, almost uncomfortably right about a specific secret that the rest of the world has completely missed.
If we examine PayPal in its absolute earliest days, they were not just a group of coders clocking in for a paycheck. They were deeply ideologically obsessed with creating a new digital currency that operated completely independent of sovereign government control.
Yes.
It was an intense, singular, borderline radical mission. They were a tribe.
And tribalism is necessary because internal conflict is the great silent killer of startups.
I love the biological analogy used here. Internal conflict in a young company is exactly like a human body suffering from an autoimmune disease. From the outside, the technical cause of death printed on the startup's autopsy report might look like external competition like catching pneumonia.
But it's not pneumonia.
Right, but the real cause, the underlying invisible vulnerability that allowed the pneumonia to kill the patient, was internal warfare that completely destroyed the company's immune system. The engineers were fighting with the marketers, so the product shipped late, so the competitor won.
To ruthlessly prevent that internal warfare, the author implemented a highly controversial radical management strategy at PayPal known as the one thing rule.
The one thing rule.
He mandated that every single employee in the entire company was responsible for doing exactly one uniquely assigned thing. And more importantly, that one thing was the only metric upon which they would be evaluated.
I have to admit, that sounds infuriating. It sounds like the ultimate micromanagement nightmare. If I'm a talented employee, I want to wear many hats. I want to contribute to marketing and product design and strategy.
Of course you do, because human beings love variety.
Right.
But what happens when three brilliant, ambitious people all try to contribute to the marketing strategy?
Because you got heads.
They start fighting over whose idea is better. They start fighting over territory and credit. By assigning everyone a mutually exclusive task, you completely eliminate the structural possibility of turf wars.
That's fascinating.
If your only job is optimizing the database and my only job is writing the legal terms of service, we have absolutely nothing to fight about. We just have to put our heads down and execute our one thing perfectly.
And when you combine that extreme, non-overlapping focus with a shared fanaticism about a secret, the result is extreme dedication. People on the outside might look at your company and whisper, that place looks like a cult. But the text argues that you actually want to be a cult.
Precisely. If you imagine a spectrum of organizational intensity, on the far left, you have a highly fluid, cynical, generic consulting firm where people are just mercenaries renting out their brains by the hour. On the extreme, terrifying far right, you have a homicidal, destructive cult led by a Charles Manson figure.
Right.
A great startup needs to be situated as far to the right on that spectrum as legally and morally possible without actually handing out the poisoned Kool-Aid.
Wow.
That intense, almost unreasonable tribalism is exactly what forged the legendary PayPal Mafia, that famous group of early PayPal employees who survived the crucible together and then went on to fundamentally shape the modern internet by building Tesla, LinkedIn, YouTube, Yelp, and Palantir. It wasn't a coincidence that they all succeeded. They shared a foundational, cult-like methodology.
But here is the terrifying catch to everything we've just discussed. You can flawlessly execute all of this. You can build a perfectly aligned cult of absolute geniuses. You can engineer a proprietary technology that is provably 10x better than anything else in existence. You can completely eliminate all internal conflict. You can have the best product in the world, and you can still go completely humiliatingly bankrupt.
And they usually do go bankrupt because they ignore the invisible engine of capitalism, the power of sales.
This is where we need to expose the great delusion of the technical mind. Most brilliant engineers and technical founders suffer from a fatal hubris. They honestly believe that once the code compiles, once the machine works, the hard part is over. They buy into the ultimate seductive lie of the tech industry. Our product is so revolutionary, it will simply sell itself.
They're dead wrong. To understand why this lie is so pervasive, we have to look at the deep cultural divide between the nerd and the salesman.
The classic showdown.
Engineers, coders, mathematicians, they fundamentally value transparency and absolute logic. In a code base, something either compiles flawlessly or it throws an error and crashes. It is entirely objective. Surface appearances, charisma, and persuasion do not matter to a compiler.
But the discipline of sales is the exact opposite of transparent logic.
Right. Sales is the dark art of changing a human mind without the human noticing that their mind has been changed.
Oh, that's good.
It relies entirely on emotional persuasion, subtlety, relationship building, and sometimes a calculated bit of psychological manipulation. Engineers inherently despise this because it feels messy, irrational, and fundamentally dishonest to them.
It is so stigmatized in our culture that salespeople literally invent an entire lexicon of fake corporate titles just to hide what they actually do. Nobody prints the word salesman on their business card anymore.
No.
If they sell software, they are account executives. If they forge corporate partnerships, they work in business development. If they sell complex financial instruments, they are investment bankers. And if they sell themselves to the public, they are politicians. Everyone is selling, but everyone is hiding it.
We all desperately want to believe we are rational actors, completely immune to the dark arts of advertising and sales. But the brutal reality of business is this. If you have not invented an effective mathematical way to sell your product and acquire customers, you do not actually have a business, no matter how elegant your code is.
So true.
To understand the mechanics of sales, we have to look at two vital metrics: CAC versus CLV.
Customer acquisition cost versus customer lifetime value.
Yeah.
This is the heartbeat of any company. Let's really break down the math here with a hypothetical example. Imagine you launch a subscription service that delivers specialized toys for dogs, and you charge $20 a month for it.
Okay, perfect. Your customer acquisition cost, your CAC, is exactly how much money you have to spend on marketing, say, buying targeted Facebook ads showing cute dogs to convince one single human being to pull out their credit card and subscribe. Let's say you have to spend $50 on ads to get one subscriber. Your CAC is $50.
And the customer lifetime value, the CLV, is the total amount of pure profit you will make from that customer before they inevitably cancel their subscription. Let's say the average customer stays subscribed for 5 months and you make $10 profit each month. Your CLV is $50.
In that scenario, your CAC is $50 and your CLV is $50. You are breaking even on the customer, but once you factor in your office rent and employee salaries, you are rapidly going bankrupt.
Right.
The iron law of business is that your lifetime value must massively structurally exceed your acquisition cost.
And based on the reality of those two numbers, businesses have to utilize entirely different methods of selling. There's a whole spectrum of distribution strategies. Let's walk through the extremes. On the very high end, you have what is called complex sales. This is for products that cost millions or even tens of millions of dollars. Think of Elon Musk trying to sell a SpaceX rocket launch to the bureaucrats at NASA. You cannot buy a billboard for that. You can't run a Facebook ad.
No, absolutely not.
A complex sale requires the CEO themselves to personally spend months or sometimes years navigating incredibly dense political, technical, and regulatory bureaucracies to close a single deal. The CAC is massive, millions of dollars in time and travel, but the CLV is a billion-dollar government contract.
Then, stepping down the price ladder, you have personal sales. The text brings up the medical platform ZocDoc. They built a network connecting patients with local doctors, and they charge the doctors a subscription fee of a few $100s a month. Now, the CEO can't personally fly around the country pitching every single
Right,
dentist.
that doesn't scale. But the CLV is high enough that they could afford to hire a massive army of dedicated commissioned salespeople to make aggressive cold calls to medical offices all day long.
And on the far opposite end of the spectrum, you have viral marketing. This is required for products that are cheap or even free and target everyday consumers.
PayPal is the absolute masterpiece of viral marketing. They had a massive problem. They needed millions of users to make the network valuable, but their CLV was tiny. A customer might only generate $5 in transaction fees over a year. They mathematically could not afford to spend $50 on traditional advertising to acquire a $5 customer.
So they completely circumvented traditional advertising. They looked at the math and realized it was cheaper to literally just hand out cash.
Which sounds insane.
They paid people to join. If you signed up for PayPal, they dropped $10 into your account. And if you sent an email referring a friend, you got another $10. Because the core product sending money inherently requires two people to participate, the product itself acted as the marketing vehicle. They achieved staggering exponential growth through a viral loop that cost them a fraction of what traditional ads would have cost.
But the text issues a massive warning about the space between personal sales and viral marketing. There is a very dangerous, highly lethal area called the dead zone.
The dead zone is the graveyard of small businesses. It happens when your pricing math falls into a gap.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Let's say you invent a really brilliant software tool that helps independent hardware store owners manage their inventory, and it costs $1,000 a year.
It sounds like a solid product, but the math is a death sentence. The price point is too high for viral consumer-style marketing to work. A busy hardware store owner is not going to just randomly click a banner ad online and impulse buy a $1,000 piece of enterprise software. But simultaneously, the CLV of $1,000 is way too low to justify hiring a smart, expensive $100,000 a year salesperson to physically travel around the country pitching hardware store owners one by one. The commission would eat all the profit. You have no viable distribution channel. You are trapped in the dead zone.
Which loops us all the way back to the power law. The power law does not just apply to investing. It heavily governs distribution channels. Most founders think they need a dozen different marketing strategies. They think they need a PR agency and a Twitter presence and Facebook ads and a dedicated sales team and a viral referral loop, all running simultaneously.
But the power law dictates that if you can get just one single distribution channel to work perfectly, you have a phenomenal, highly profitable business. But if you spread your energy and try for several channels simultaneously and fail to fundamentally nail even one of them, your company is dead.
I can practically hear a listener in the audience asking right now, this is all fascinating analysis for Silicon Valley tech founders, but I'm a teacher, or I'm a mid-level manager. I'm not an entrepreneur. Does this sales stuff actually matter to me?
And the answer to that is a profound echoing yes, because everybody, regardless of their job title, sells.
Everybody.
If you look around your office or your organization right now and you do not clearly see who the salespeople are, then you are the salesperson. When you are sitting in a meeting trying to convince your team to adopt your new strategy, you are selling. When you sit down for your annual review and ask your boss for a raise, you are selling your own CLV. When you try to convince a partner to move to a new city, you are selling a vision of the future. You cannot escape the mechanics of distribution.
And if you refuse to acknowledge those mechanics, you are inviting disaster.
Which brings us to the ultimate staggering cautionary tale. What historically happens when an entire sector of supposedly brilliant people collectively ignores everything we have discussed today.
A catastrophe. When they ignore the search for secrets, when they rely blindly on indefinite optimism, when they have no concrete plan, and when they arrogantly ignore the cold, hard math of sales.
You get the apocalyptic clean tech crash of the late 2000s. People were throwing literally billions of dollars into solar panel factories and green energy startups, and almost all of them went spectacularly publicly bankrupt. How did an entire industry of highly educated engineers fail so thoroughly?
Because they failed to interrogate reality. They were swept up in a social movement rather than building rigorous businesses. The book proposes a ruthless framework of 7 critical questions that absolutely every business must be able to answer affirmatively if it wants to survive. And the clean tech industry failed almost every single one. We need to go through these 7 questions in detail because they serve as the ultimate checklist for any ambitious endeavor.
Let's do it. Question 1, the engineering question. The test here is, can you create a genuine breakthrough technology, or are you merely offering an incremental improvement?
The clean tech companies failed this immediately. They were building solar panels that were maybe 5% or 10% more efficient than older models. They were not 10x better. And as we established, consumers will not switch their entire energy infrastructure for a 10% improvement.
Question 2, the timing question. Is right now the mathematically correct time to start this specific business?
They assumed that because climate change was in the news, the timing was right. But the underlying materials, science, and manufacturing infrastructure for massive solar deployment simply wasn't ready yet to compete with the price of natural gas. They were too early, which in business is functionally identical to being wrong.
Right. Question 3, the monopoly question. Are you starting with a massive share of a small, defensible market?
Clean tech founders completely fell for the competitor's lie. They defined themselves as part of the trillion-dollar global energy market and thought capturing 1% would make them billionaires. Instead, they entered a hyper-competitive commodity market with zero pricing power and were instantly crushed by cheap overseas manufacturing.
Question 4, the people question. Do you have the right team?
They often had brilliant scientists who were completely misaligned with the executives in suits who just wanted to cash in on government grants. The foundation was cracked.
Question 5, the distribution question. Do you have a viable way to not just create, but physically deliver and sell your product?
They assumed clean energy sells itself because it's good for the planet. They ignored the incredibly complex, entrenched political bureaucracies of local utility monopolies that actually control the power grid. They had no distribution channel.
Wow. Question 6, the durability question. Will your market position actually be defensible 10 and 20 years into the future?
Because they had no 10x proprietary technology and no monopoly, the moment the Chinese government decided to heavily subsidize massive solar panel factories, the American startups had no defensive moat. They were completely commoditized overnight.
And finally, question 7, the secret question. Have you identified a unique, hidden opportunity that the rest of the world does not see?
The overarching secret of clean tech was simply, the world needs clean energy. But that wasn't a secret. It was the most universally agreed upon conventional wisdom of the decade. Everyone knew it, which meant the market was flooded with dumb money.
The text highlights one specific company, Solyndra, as the ultimate tragic monument to these failures. Solyndra managed to secure hundreds of millions of dollars in federal government loans to build a radically complex, highly unconventional cylindrical solar panel. It looked like something out of a sci-fi movie.
But it wasn't 10x better at generating electricity. It was just incredibly complex and wildly expensive to manufacture.
Right. When foreign competitors simply started mass-producing cheap, standard flat panels, Solyndra collapsed almost instantly because they hadn't answered the engineering, monopoly, or durability questions. They were running on pure, indefinite optimism.
They believed that simply wearing the label of green energy would exempt them from the iron laws of capitalism. It did not.
But speaking of massive technological shifts, there is an overarching cultural anxiety right now that mirrors the fear of the clean tech crash, but on a much more personal level. It is the existential dread surrounding artificial intelligence.
It is the classic man versus machine narrative, the deep-seated, very understandable fear that as computers become exponentially smarter, they are going to eventually replace all human labor and render us economically obsolete.
I want to use an analogy here to separate two concepts that people constantly conflate: globalization and technology, because they impact human labor in completely different ways. Let's compare the global economy to a high school cafeteria.
Okay, a cafeteria.
Globalization, which is one-to-one progress, is like you and I sitting at the table trading the sandwiches we brought from home. It is a process of substitution. We are fighting over the exact same limited resources. If a factory worker in another country can build a car for cheaper, their labor directly substitutes for the labor of an American worker. Someone wins, someone loses.
But technology 0 to 1 progress is fundamentally different. Technology is not bringing a cheaper sandwich to the cafeteria. Technology is like inventing a sci-fi food replicator that can materialize infinite sandwiches out of thin air.
That is the perfect way to frame it. Technology provides complementarity, not substitution. It doesn't replace us. It elevates what we can do.
The root of the AI fear is a misunderstanding of what computers are actually good at. Computers and human brains are not rival competitors. They are exceptionally good at fundamentally different things.
How so?
Computers excel at efficiently processing massive, incomprehensible amounts of raw data. They can search a billion records in a second, but they do not possess intentionality or complex moral judgment or the ability to navigate highly ambiguous social nuances.
Right.
Humans, on the other hand, are terrible at processing millions of rows of spreadsheet data. We get bored and make mistakes, but we excel at making complex, nuanced judgments in chaotic situations.
The author actually proved this thesis by saving his own company. In the early days, PayPal was bleeding money. They were losing millions of dollars a month to incredibly sophisticated credit card fraud, largely orchestrated by international organized crime syndicates. It was an existential threat. The fraud was going to kill the company.
They initially tried to solve it with pure technology. They wrote automated software to catch the fraudulent transactions. But the criminals were human and therefore adaptable.
Of course.
The moment the software learned a pattern, the criminals changed their tactics, and the computer was blind again.
But they also realized that the human analysts couldn't physically review thousands of transactions a minute. The volume was too high. So they embraced complementarity. They built a hybrid system called Igor. The computer did what it did best. It processed the massive data stream in real time and flagged the most highly suspicious transactions based on complex patterns.
But it didn't make the final decision.
Exactly. It presented those anomalies to a team of human analysts on a clean interface, and the humans used their complex judgment to make the final call on those specific flags.
That symbiosis, man and machine working together as complements rather than substitutes, completely neutralized the fraud and saved the company. And Thiel took that exact proven principle and used it to found Palantir, a massive data analytics company.
Right.
Palantir builds software to help intelligence analysts find terrorists and financial criminals. It doesn't replace the CIA analyst. It uses extreme computing power to process billions of data points, phone records, flight manifests, bank transfers, and presents the anomalies to the human expert, drastically amplifying their ability to make critical judgments. AI isn't going to replace humans. The most incredibly valuable businesses of the next century will be those that use algorithms to empower, not eliminate, human capability.
Which naturally leads us to wonder, who are the people capable of building these kinds of world-altering 0-to-1 businesses? This brings us to the final, perhaps most fascinating psychological insight of the text. The founder's paradox.
If you study the personalities of the founders who actually managed to build these generational monopolies, you realize they are truly bizarre individuals. They do not fit anywhere on a normal psychological bell curve. Or rather, they paradoxically sit at both extreme, contradictory ends of the bell curve at the exact same time.
I found this observation so deeply true. A typical visionary founder is often someone who is highly privileged. Maybe they grew up wealthy or went to Stanford, but they simultaneously feel deeply marginalized or alienated from normal society.
Yeah, they're walking contradictions.
They are often incredible, nerdy, socially awkward introverts who somehow also possess this hypnotic, charismatic ability to lead thousands of people. They are ultimate insiders and complete outsiders at the same time.
Think of figures like Steve Jobs or Elon Musk, or even historical figures like Howard Hughes. We culturally require these eccentric, almost mythological, deeply weird individuals because they are practically the only people who possess the irrational stubbornness required to push society beyond safe, boring, incremental steps.
That's a good point.
Normal, well-adjusted people do not try to build rockets to Mars. They just take a safe job at a consulting firm.
But the text also issues a profound, flashing red warning light for anyone who fits this description. Founders can very easily become fatally trapped by their own mythology.
Yes, this is what we might call the Ayn Rand trap. The author explicitly warns that founders, once they achieve some success, should absolutely not start believing they are Ayn Randian prime movers, these mythological titans who can just single-handedly secede from society. There is no real-world gulch where the brilliant creators can hide away.
Right, you cannot do it alone. You
Right.
need your engineers, you need your sales team, you need the infrastructure of society to support your creation. If a founder starts believing their own press clippings to the point of divine self-sufficiency, if they think they are a god who doesn't need anyone else, they will inevitably lose their tether to reality, alienate their allies, and completely destroy the company they built.
It requires an incredibly delicate, almost impossible psychological balance. You must possess the staggering, irrational ego required to believe you can single-handedly change the course of human history, while simultaneously maintaining the profound humility required to realize you absolutely cannot execute that vision alone in a vacuum.
Which perfectly brings us to the end of our journey today. Let's pull back and summarize the core thesis of everything we've explored, because the stakes presented here are incredibly high.
The overarching, inescapable message of this book is that we, both as a collective society and as individuals, face a stark binary choice.
Okay, what's the choice?
On one side is the path of stagnation. If we continue to focus exclusively on one-to-end progress, if we only copy what already exists, if we retreat into indefinite optimism and view our lives as lottery tickets, we will eventually exhaust our resources. We will be permanently trapped in a brutal Shakespearean competition, fighting increasingly bloody wars over a shrinking economic pie.
On the other side.
On the other side is the path of the singularity, going from 0 to 1, choosing to do the hard work of discovering hidden secrets, building completely new technology, and purposefully designing a dramatically better, definite future.
And why does this matter so deeply for you, the listener? Why do we do this deep dive today? Because we want to empower you to step off that exhausting treadmill of hyper-competition. We want you to stop fighting for the exact same generic, unfulfilling prizes as everyone else. Stop viewing your career, your relationships, and your potential as a diversified portfolio of random lottery tickets. You are not a lottery ticket. You have profound agency.
You can actively choose to interrogate reality and find a secret. You can choose to build a monopoly of one, focusing your unique talents on a singular, deeply valuable pursuit that no one else can replicate.
So we want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your week. Take a hard look at your life, your career trajectory, and the industry you work in. Ask yourself, what is your secret? What is the one incredibly valuable, transformative thing that is sitting right there in plain sight, completely ignored by the consensus, just waiting for someone brave enough to actually build it?
The future does not just passively happen on its own. It has to be actively, courageously built.
Please subscribe to the Book Nook so you never miss an episode. And we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us which book you'd like us to explore next. We read every single one.